Does your car shake when you put on the brakes? Well, stay tuned because we're going to talk about that. So if your car shakes when you apply the brakes, then chances are you've got warped rotors. If your steering wheel shakes left and right when you're put on the brakes, especially when you're coming off the highway, you'll notice that a lot. Or you might feel it in the brake pedal, usually due to warped rotors. So if your car is shaking, you do need to check out the steering and suspension, tie rods, wheel bearings, ball joints, everything like that, control arms. Make sure there's not an unsafe issue with those, because if you have looseness or broken parts in the suspension or steering, that needs to be addressed. That's a safety issue. But if all that's good and the shaking only happens when you're braking, chances are you've got warped rotors, and it's usually in the front almost all the time, because the front brakes do most of the work. They do about 75% of the work when you're braking in your vehicle. So got a rotor right here. And the brake pads ride on this rotor. The rotor turns with the wheel, and the brake pads will squeeze against this surface and stop it. And so if the rotor is warped, then you'll have irregular thickness here. You'll have high spots and low spots. And when your brake pads go across the high spot and then the low spot, that's when you feel the shaking in your steering wheel. So are the rotors actually warped? Usually not in the traditional sense. So you might think of the rotor being warped, like curved like this. That's not usually what happens. Usually it's thickness variation, which is thickness this way. So this will be thicker, then not as thick, and then thicker. And that's what causes that pulsation in your brake pedal or the shaking in your steering wheel. So what causes this to happen? Usually it's heat. So when you brake really hard, or you use your brakes for an extended period, or maybe you have a brake caliper that's stuck and it keeps applying the brake even while you're driving and you don't have your foot on the brake, all those things can lead to overheating of the rotor, and then you'll get what's known as hot spots. And so basically what happens is the brake pads are made of a friction material that wears away while you're braking, and so eventually you have to replace those pads. So these rotors are coated in a thin layer of that friction material and from the brake pads. And if let's say you come off the highway and you're holding on the brake the whole time, slowing down to the stop sign from highway speeds down to 0, and you get to the stop sign and you hold your foot on the brake, and if that rotor got really hot and you're holding the brake pad in that one spot, then it's going to leave an imprint. It's going to leave extra friction material stuck to the pad right there, and that's what can cause the disc thickness variation. That's what we call it in the industry. And it can lead to more and more buildup, and the problem just gets worse and worse when you keep going over that high spot. So what can you do to avoid this? One is keep your brake system serviced. You want to make sure when you change your brake pads, do your brake jobs, that you clean and lubricate the slide pins, inspect the pistons inside the calipers, make sure that they're okay, they're moving freely. Sometimes even, this is a little bit less common, but sometimes a brake hose can fail internally, and it will allow fluid to pass down to the piston in one direction, but the fluid can't move back up to release the brakes, so the brakes stay applied. A lot of customers are surprised to hear that when I tell them they have a failed brake hose, and that's what's causing their brakes to stay applied all the time, because it doesn't happen very often, and a lot of drivers never experience it, but sometimes I notice, especially on Fords, some of their brake hoses do that, And basically it's just a little flap inside the brake hose that stops fluid from being able to travel back upwards, but it can go down. So the other thing you can do is your driving habits. You really want to avoid dramatic braking, locking up your brakes. It's because braking really hard can overheat the rotors. You want to avoid maybe two-footed driving, where you have your foot on the gas pedal and the brake, because if you have the brakes slightly applied, they could be going all the time. You want to avoid driving with your parking brake on. That can overheat the rear brakes, and you can get this kind of issue. So, yeah, driving habits and making sure that your brake components are maintained properly. That's one way. That will go a long way to avoid having warped rotors and that shaking in your steering wheel. So there's a lot of debate about whether or not these actually do warp. And like I said, they don't really warp like a long piece of wood that's curved, like you see at Home Depot when you're going to buy lumber. Some of them are twisted in a long direction. That's not really what happens, but they do. They can get swollen right here, and that is a kind of warping. So they can get swollen. Like I have some out in the scrap pile off of a big truck where these are swollen so much that they're cracked, and it's just, you can't even drive the vehicle because when you hit that high spot, it shakes you pretty violently. Actually took them off of a Freightliner, a step van. So I hope this information is useful to you, and you will know what is going on if your car is shaking while you're braking. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.